Hi, I'm Bob Nelson. Thanks so much for having me be a part of your meeting. I'm excited to be with you, even if it is electronically. We've got a lot to cover here in a short amount of time, so I want to dig right in and start with a couple quotes. I love quotes. They help set a tone and a frame for our discussion. And the first is from Harold Poland, who's former chairman and CEO of Ford Motor Company, who once said, "One of the stepping stones to a world-class operation is to tap into the creative and intellectual power of each and every employee." Today, more than ever before, we have to find ways to have every single person, every manager, every supervisor, every frontline person truly engaged and excited about what's going on, acting in the organization's best interest on a day-to-day basis. And at the same time, we need that from every employee, and that adds to our competitive advantage. I'm convinced every employee wants to work in a place where they can be a part of something larger than themselves, where they can be excited about coming to work and who they're working with and the job that they're doing for the customer. In fact, the second quote from Bill Hewlett, co-founder of Hewlett-Packard, he once said, "Men and women want to do a good job, a creative job, and if they provide the proper environment, they will do so." This simple observation, to me, represents a drastic shift of what it takes to get the best out of today's employees. As a manager, the days of command and control, my way or the highway, telling people what to do are over. Today, you get the best from employees by setting an environment in which they want to do their best. Performance will always be their call. You can't force people to perform, but you can set up an environment that's open, supportive, encouraging, inspiring, engaging, where day after day they will want to give you an even better shot at what they're capable of. And the final quote is a very recent one, just this week from Fortune magazine. My professor, Dr. Peter Drucker at the Claremont Graduate University, said in an interview, "The dominance of the U.S. is already over." In talking in terms of a world economy, he said, "What is emerging is a world economy with no single center. India is becoming a powerhouse and a knowledge center very fast. You are on the cutting edge of making it happen. You have the potential and the ability to take it to the next level, and you're going to do that more than anything through the people you have committed to your success and excellence." So we're going to focus on the topic of initiative. What is it? How do we get more of it? What does it look like? And I define initiative very simply as doing what needs to be done without waiting to be told. I'm convinced that no organization today can survive, let alone thrive, with employees only doing what they're told to do. Things are changing too quickly. Technology is changing. Opportunities are emerging too fast. It's the people at the front line, closest to the customer, they're in the best position to deal with the situation, a problem, an opportunity, and act on it. As we can set up the organization to meet people and set them up to make that happen, we have the ability to get farther faster. Now I find one more quote. Jack Welch, former chairman of General Electric, he put it this way. He said, "We have to get everyone in the organization involved. If we do that right, the best ideas will rise to the top." That's the potential I feel that you have in dealing with the human resource. Now this just makes sense because employees are closer to the details of their job. They know best how to do their job. They've been doing it day after day. They know how it's changing. They're closer to the customers, and whether that's the customer outside your organization or an internal customer in a different department, they're closer to that person. And they're closer, as I said, to the problems and the opportunities as they arise if we can empower them and set them up to handle those problems more quickly before they become larger, or the opportunities before they go to the competition, all the better. So there's a lot of benefits for this topic of initiative. And for the employer, it starts with a greater responsiveness to the problems and opportunities of the market that we're in, of our environment. It creates a more positive, a more motivating work environment, and it helps the organization to be more competitive. So overwhelming advantages to the organization if we can truly empower and engage employees at every level. But there's also advantages and benefits to every employee on this topic as well. I find that for employees that grab hold of the topic of initiative, it makes their job more exciting. It makes it more interesting. It puts no boundaries on what they're capable of doing. It helps them develop a reputation for getting things done. So they can take their job, any job, and move it towards one with the type of work they want to do more of. As people ask to have them on their team, or they're considered more easily for promotions. And it leads to some of the traditional incentives, such as promotions, such as pay increases, such as increased learning opportunities. So the topic has enormous potential for employer and employee alike, and the question becomes, how can we get employees to take more personal accountability to take initiative? And in my view of things, I've actually, as I've thought about this and studied and researched the topic, I've actually come to the point and said, wouldn't it be nice if we could tell every employee from their very first day of work the importance of their job, put it in a context more than just a job description. The point a job description is written is already out of date today. And what I did in my book, Please Don't Just Do What I Tell You, Do What Needs to Be Done, I did a hypothetical letter that I saw perhaps going to every employee when they started in the company. And it says this: Dear employee, you've been hired to handle some pressing needs we have. If we could have gotten by not hiring you, we would have. But we've determined that we need someone with your skills and experience, and that you were the best person to help us with our needs. We've offered you the position, and you've accepted. Thanks. During the course of your employment, you will be asked to do many things: general responsibilities, specific assignments, group and individual projects. You will have many chances to excel and confirm that we made a good choice in hiring you. However, there is one foremost responsibility you may never be specifically requested of you, but that you need to always keep in mind through the duration of your employment. I call this the ultimate expectation, and it goes as follows: always do what most needs to be done without waiting to be asked. Now, we've hired you to do a job, yes, but more important, we've hired you to think, to use your judgment and act in the best interest of the organization at all times. If we never say this again, don't take it as an indication that it's no longer important or that we've changed our priorities. We are likely to get caught up in the daily press of business, the never-ending changes of operation, the ongoing rush of activities. Our day-to-day practices may make it look like this principle no longer applies. Don't be deceived by this. As long as you're employed with us, you have our permission to act in our mutual best interest. If at any time you do not feel we are doing the right thing, the thing that you most believe would help us all, please say so. You have our permission to speak up when necessary, to state what is unstated, to make a suggestion, or to question an action or decision. This doesn't mean we'll always agree with you, not that we will necessarily change what we are doing, but we will always want to hear what you most believe would help us better achieve our goals and purpose, and to create a mutually successful experience in the process. You will need to seek to understand how and why things are done in the way they are before you seek to change existing work processes. Try to work with the systems that are in place first, but then tell us if you think those systems need to be changed. Discuss what is presented here with me, with others in the organization, so it might all better apply the ultimate expectation. Signed, your manager. If we can send that message to every employee, to tell them, yes, you have a job to do, but constantly be on the lookout for what we can do better, what you can do better, how we can streamline a process, how we can save money that we've not thought about saving in the past, or how we can make more money with an idea. As we harness the employee to do that, we tap into a wellspring that has unlimited potential, I'm convinced. I tend to feel, I even would go so far as to say, the biggest mistake you can make in life is to think you work for someone else. Now yes, maybe you get a paycheck from your employer, and I have my own company, I get a paycheck from the customer, but ultimately we have to each take personal responsibility for what we're doing, for what we're learning, how we're growing, and the ability to get things done in our sphere of influence. And I did some research for this book and on the internet, and I got 7,700 replies from multiple countries on this topic of initiative. I asked a simple question, and that was, what is most important for getting ahead in the workplace from your perspective. And of the 7,700 and some responses I got to that, I was surprised and intrigued by what the people saw in their own experience. They cited political savvy at 12% of the case of getting ahead, sort of who you know and how you get something done in the politics of the workplace, and that sometimes we all have to deal with. They cited intelligence at 16%, being responsible for people getting ahead, inspiration at 17%, but by far larger than all those combined, they found that it was those people that took initiative, 55%, contributed to them getting ahead in the workplace today. So how do you get employees to take initiative? I think is an engaging question, and what I've tried to do is boil down from the thousands of people I've talked to and examples I've researched, boil down to the common denominator, what actually initiative means and what it can mean for any individual. And I call this the 4 Ps of initiative. And let me go over them quickly, and we'll talk about each in a little bit greater depth. Positive accountability, taking charge, starting between your ears of saying, I'm going to make this happen, is where it all starts. Preparation and homework, that you can have a great idea to do something, but regardless of what it is, there's going to be a little bit of homework involved. It might be tracking the number of times a customer asks for a certain thing. It might be talking to someone in the accounting department to help cost out an idea, some type of preparation. Once you get that together, however, there's always going to be some aspect of presentation or sales of your idea to others. It might be coworkers, it might be your manager, it might be a team on that project, but some type of selling in a formal way on why we should do this. And finally, a hallmark of initiative is persistence. The systematic follow-up and in the belief in your own idea to stick with it over time. And if it gets turned down the first time, or if it's to go back and make it a better idea, to collect more data, or look for the timing when it will be the right thing to do. Those are the 4 Ps of initiative. And let me give you a couple examples that kind of brings them into focus. In the States here, we have a fast-growing franchise called Starbucks. I think they're actually spreading out around the world now. There's over 6,000 Starbucks stores, and 600 or more were open last year alone, specialty coffee and whatnot. And I have in the book an example of a woman that worked at an early Starbucks back when they were just very small. And on one hot day, she had an idea that she decided to throw some ice into a coffee drink. She put it in the blender and tried it and thought it was pretty good. She had coworkers try it, and they liked it too, and she started selling it in the store. Well, the initial reaction she got from this effort of hers, the idea and her excitement about it, was a formal letter from corporate that said, you're not allowed to just create products, stop selling that. Well, she had been selling it for the better part of a month, and she held on. I guess she could have lost her job at that point, but she held on because she wanted to get to month end and have a complete month of sales. And when she did that and presented her findings, it was one of the top-selling drinks in the store. Well, Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, personally gave her a call and thanked her for ignoring his edict. The Frappuccino that she created in its very first year was a $50 million product line that has grown every year since. Anyone has the potential to have an idea that could work, that could make sense. I'm convinced every employee has a $50,000 idea at least that if we can harness the power of it and allow it to happen and allow it to flourish, we can tap into the potential of that gain for all of us. I'll give you another example. Johnsonville Foods, a sausage maker in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. They had their CEO, Ralph Stair, I was talking to at one point, and he said that his secretary, Elaine Crawford, she one day asked him, Mr. Stair, why don't we sell our product directly to consumers? They distribute it through other outlets and wholesalers and whatnot. And he said if she had asked that a few years earlier, he would have said, well, Elaine, that's why we pay you to type the letters around here. We make the decisions. But he didn't say that. Instead, he said, Elaine, that's an excellent observation. why don't you check into that and see what you come up with? And she did. And she had the energy to check into it. And she did a search, and she came up with a little plan. Fast forward 18 months later, and Elaine is running a multi-million-dollar online sales of their product to consumers. It can happen. It does happen if we allow people the ability to run with this. One more example from now, a company we all know and respect, 3M. Known for making things by the mile and selling them by the foot. Scotch tape, sandpaper, you name it. Well, everyone knows the story about the Post-it, little piece of paper, and Art Fry, who sang in a choir on Sundays. He would have pieces of paper fall out of the hymnal, and he decided, wouldn't it be great if we can just put some stickiness on a piece of paper so it stays on the page? Well, what a great idea. They must have embraced that, and off it went. Fact of the matter is they didn't. He took that idea back to the company, manufacturing look at, and they said there's no way we could do it. It would be a very difficult process, and it would be hard to control the quality of it. You know what his reaction to that was? That's great news, because once we're able to get it right, it'll be next to impossible for anyone to copy us. It didn't slow him down a bit. They took it to marketing. They did a 7-city market test, and they came back. You know what they said? It's a bomb. Nobody wants it. Nobody knew what it was. Art immediately said, you tested it wrong. Now, they've been testing products like that for 100 years, but he said, no, this tested a different way. This take the product and give it to people. And for the first time in the history of that company, they went out and gave Post-its to different businesses. Art Fry and other colleagues walked around to small businesses. Hey, try these. We call them Post-its. See if you like them. Now, when they tested the idea that way, 90% of people they gave the product to wanted to order more. And so it goes, that there was a whole sales process of rollout of that product, and they gave it to administrative assistants inside the company, and it came to the point where now it's got to be the official product, a $300 million product for 3M every day. I noticed that just in the last week, I hear it's been out for, I don't know, 10 years or more. Last week, they're coming out with new types of products, extra sticky Post-its, so you can further innovate as you go. The point is that a lot of times after the fact, we look at an idea and we say, well, we must have realized that was a great idea, but on the front end of it, rarely is that the case. Channel the person that has the most energy for that idea to pursue it, and you'll be surprised at the results. So the foundation of this entire topic, the first P, is positive accountability. I've got a gentleman I know in Minnesota as a consultant. John Miller's his name. He was telling me about how he was at the retirement party of a vice president of engineering. And he got up to speak and thank people. And instead of going to a long speech, he just told a simple story. He said, when I was promoted first as a supervisor, I was very excited. I was promoted for my technical excellence, as most of us are, and was now managing others. And within a short amount of time, that excitement became a concern to me as I dealt with people's problems and frustrations. And it was a messy operation, and it was very frustrating. And increasingly, he felt the burden of managing people's problems. And one day, after he'd been a manager for several years, he was at home during a holiday with his family. And he spent the better part of a 3-day weekend kind of complaining about work. And why don't people do what they're supposed to? And why do I have to keep telling people what to do? And how can I light a fire under people and get them excited and focus the way I want them to? And at the end of the weekend, at the end of the weekend, his mother called him over and said, John, I want to give you something. And she pressed into his palm a key, old-fashioned skeleton key. And he said, John, I want you to take this. And when you ever think going forward that you have a problem, I want you to remember that you're the key to making it happen. And it starts with you. And it kind of caught him off guard, and he thought about that. And he said from that moment forward, at the age of 35, he said he learned to stop acting like a victim and start acting like a leader. And from that moment forward, he never complained. He never griped about his job. He was excited to make it happen and look forward to helping and working with people. John Miller came up with a principle called the QBQ. They says that when you're faced with the situation or when you have a problem, ask what he calls the question behind the question. Instead of saying, why is this happening? Why didn't someone tell me sooner? Whose fault is this? Don't ask why or who. Instead, begin your question with what or how. What can we do now? How can we fix this? What should we do next? Include in that the word I. What can I do to make us go forward? And focus the question on an action. Not just a complaining, on an action. What or how can I do something to help us go forward? And just from that simple framing, you could take and apply that in almost any situation, any job, and harness the power of this whole topic of initiative. Now the second step, preparation. Regardless of whatever great idea you have, and you might have had an employee sometime, I know I have, that they say, well, we should do this. Why don't we do this? And then 6 months later they say, I always said we should have done that. It's not good enough just to have an idea. You have to take the action to help develop it. And that, whatever form that may take, in the book I've got many strategies on how you can collect information, how you can have a dry run, how you can do a pilot project and whatnot. And I want to share with you just one technique that I've found and people I know have found helpful. And it's called a points of power exercise, assessing your points of power. Now, when we talk about power, a lot of times, got a little star here. A lot of times when we talk about power, there's 5 types of power. There's position power that comes with our job, the formal authority that we all have. There's knowledge power, and that would be expertise that we have in engineering, for example. You can have task power, that's specific expertise in doing a certain procedure or process that's used in your operation. You can have relationship power, and that's who you know and the relationship, and that could be someone you carpool with or someone that you know socially in the organization. Or finally, you can have personal power, personal charm and charisma that all of us have to different degrees. And these are our bases that we operate from in getting anything done. And what I find is that if you take a moment and assess in the situation you're in what you bring to the party in terms of power, you often can learn to harness other aspects of it. Let me give you an example. I was, when this book came out, I remember someone called me and they had worked for a .com technology, and he said that in his company he had an idea for creating a web service. He looked at that and at the idea, and he position power that it didn't exist, and he had very little position power. If you do hash marks on each of these on a scale of say 1 to 10, he would say I was very low on position power. I had some knowledge on how to pull off my idea, so he's maybe a little higher on that. I'd never really done it before, and so his task power was lower. But he had a supportive environment and relationships, and he knew people that could help make this happen much higher. And he had the personal belief in this idea that it would be helpful to the company, even though it wasn't a service they currently had. So he marked that very high. And as you look at these and then compare the star that you have on that, a lot of times you find that some elements, in this instance, his relationship, his personal aspects of power were stronger than others, and he, as you can leverage those to get more formal authority or to get more task power, to get the learning you need to get the job done. Long story short, in using an analysis like that, he was able to push forward this idea and created this software services. He told me that 2 or 3 years later, as he got that going, it became a viable revenue stream for the organization. Actually, the company he was working for went under went out of business. It was a .com company, but his area around this one project and the 3 or 4 other people that he had brought into it, they survived and actually were sold to another organization where he was given complete freedom for how he pursued a successful project. And so the power remains that in any environment you could take someone that an idea and use that your power basis to move it forward. I think the third aspect of presentation is also very important. That there's typically in any idea you have, there's so many ways they could be shot down. To any idea that comes up, you can always say, hey, if it's such a great idea, how come we're not doing it already? Or you could say, we tried that 2 years ago, and it didn't work. So the conclusion that it's not a good idea, even during times of change, maybe it didn't work 2 years ago, it could work today. So you have to have strategies for overcoming obstacles, for taking initiative. And I noticed in looking at information from your company, for example, just potential obstacles, and I'd love to hear about other ones that you might face on this topic when we do Q&A. But I noticed in looking at your materials that potential obstacle that you might have as you're a very strong engineering company and you have a dedication to TQM, for example, part of that is getting it right the first time, every time. Strong value. Here on the very next page, you have another value that you state in your own materials, and that is of being an energized, open, informal, and supportive work environment. Those could be two values that are in conflict that need to be resolved. What does it look like to be supportive and informal if we're also concerned about getting it right the first time, every time? And maybe you need to come up with strategies where people can test ideas and not worry about being wrong as we're moving towards a better solution. Just an observation. And the fourth step, persistence, the hallmark on this topic, hands down, besides starts with having the idea and the energy to go forward. The foundation is where it starts, but the hallmark of this topic is sticking with something you really believe. Even if it doesn't happen right away, even if it's not the second or third try, if you think it makes sense, come back to it, get more evidence, get more support, and present it again. Look for the timing that makes sense. And as you do that, you will have harnessed really the essence of this topic on those 4 specific aspects, and each of them have multiple strategies within them. So if that is what it takes, what do organizations do to make this happen with their employees? And again, in the ones I've worked with, I find a number of things. That they make it clear that they want this. We need it, we want it, and they state that to employees, and they have the expectation that this is going to help us be more successful. I'll give you a couple examples. At Intel, they have a policy they call it intellectual honesty. That this high-tech company, the cornerstone of their success is this intangible policy called intellectual honesty, that they expect whoever you are working there, that if you don't agree with something they're doing, they expect you to speak up and to say why you don't agree with that. Why do we keep putting money in this project? It's not going anywhere. Our customers don't want this. And to defend their beliefs and to argue even with peers, with management, if you really believe that. And just have a discussion and come up with possibilities that might broker both of our needs. They want that much more than people closing down and saying, oh, whatever, I checked my brains at the door and I'm just here to make it happen. That's a surefire way to failure, to engage people on a daily basis. At Hewlett-Packard, who I last presented this topic to, by the way, they have something they call rules of the garage. They started in a garage and they wanted to get back to that. And so they came up with making clear what the rules are for us to innovate. And they put it on posters and posted around. And it's a number of things. Let me just pick out a couple of these for you. Believe you can change the world. They want to start with that we can do anything. Radical ideas are not bad ideas. Invent different ways of working. Make a contribution every day. Believe that together we can do anything. and finally, invent. If we're doing these things day in and day out, good progress will come on our problems. Now, so you want to say you want it, you've got to then provide guidelines for how to get it. Now, this could take a lot of shapes and sizes. It can be from the values that you promote and talk about. It can be from the actions that you show on a daily basis. A recent Gallup survey, they found that 66% of workers say their managers have asked them to get more involved in decision-making in organizations today, but less than 14% say that managers have actually empowered them to make decisions. So there's a huge difference between talking the talk and walking the walk, and sometimes the behavior that you show is going to set the tone for getting more initiative. A couple company examples here for you. W.L. Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex out of Delaware, they have a philosophy called above or below the waterline. Now they're on the coast, on the ocean, and so it's a boating example. They tell employees when you have a situation, a decision to make, is it above or below the waterline on the boat? If it's above the waterline, that means if it turns out to be wrong and there's a hole in the boat, we're not going to take on waters. There could be no harm done. If it's below the waterline, that means it's going to endanger the craft. Now, what would it mean to endanger the craft in a business context? You're going to lose a key customer. You're going to your costs are going to double because of that decision if you make the wrong one. Now, at that point, they say you owe it to yourself, to us, to get broader buy-in to that decision to make sure it's the right one. With your manager, with the colleague, with the customer focus group, whatever is necessary to make sure it's the right decision if it's a high-risk decision. That's one way that they get the best decision-making from their people and get them involved without shying away from the risk involved. At 3M, who we were talking about, they average 15% of technical staff's time is spent working on their own projects and ideas. Now that's the average. For some technical people, they spend much more time developing and pursuing their own ideas for what might turn out to be products or services that they then could sell. Or at Honeywell, my wife used to work at Honeywell as a computer scientist, that they allow employees to apply for internal grants. So if you have an idea, they have a budget you can apply to for seed money to pursue that funding. 3M does the same thing, that you present a business plan and you can be given seed money to take that idea to the next level of development on the way to being a new product or service. So say you want it, provide guidelines and resources for getting it, and finally, and perhaps most importantly, I feel, is notice it when it happens. Okay? As you start to move and get more initiative, you've got to notice that and call it out as a positive, not to reprimand people or to tell them they made a mistake and focus on that. And you could do this in thousands and thousands of ways. In fact, one of the books I wrote was called 1,001 Ways to Reward Employees, and ways that you can spotlight a positive consequence about a desired behavior or performance. So on the topic of initiative, at Hershey's Chocolate in Pennsylvania, they have the Order of the Extended Neck. It's a trophy they give to people that took a risk, that made a calculated decision, whether it was right or wrong, that they tried to stretch the organization, to take on a challenge, and regardless of how it came out, they want to recognize that effort and the initiative and the forward thinking on the part of the people that do so. At Hewlett-Packard, for example, they have the funny story. They had an employee, a software engineer, one day burst into his manager's office. He said, "You won't believe it, I finally found that software bug." He'd been looking for this problem in the software for weeks. His manager was so excited, he wanted to do something right away to thank the employee. He groped around on his desk and hands the employee a banana from his lunch with the words, "Great job, I knew you could do it." Now, I'm not sure how you'd feel if your boss gave you a banana one day. That might seem kind of strange, but this guy had some fun with it. He showed everyone the banana the boss gave him and why. It took on a life and a story in that organization. Today in that division in Hewlett-Packard, Sunnyvale, California, 11 years later, the most prestigious award for technical achievement is the Golden Banana Award. Not the same banana. They retired that puppy and created a plaque. In fact, when you find something that works, you can work to get more out of it. They created a lapel pin of a little banana. It's turned into one of the most key drivers of their senior technical staff in ways that could hardly be imaginable based on the simple ways that they notice. Or at Busch Gardens, Anheuser-Busch in Tampa, Florida, they give all their supervisors these tokens. Say, Anheuser-Busch, making friends is our business, thank you. And one of the ways that they spotlight behavior that they want more of is they tell the supervisors, whenever you see an employee that's actually doing a core value that we've outlined as being important, that's going to help us all be successful, and for them it's safety, customer service, teamwork, give them one of these. So a supervisor, even if that employee doesn't work for you, even if you haven't met them, so a supervisor sees an employee helping another worker carry a load without being asked to help them that's struggling with something they're carrying. That's what we're looking for. That's the type of behavior that's going to help us all, everyone pitching in together. Or another employee being pleasant and friendly to a customer and helpful on a hot day that takes a little extra effort. That's what we're looking for. Now, the way this program works, I can give you a dozen variations, is employees given this token, and they can turn it into payroll and get an extra $10 in their next paycheck. But they said, Bob, hardly anyone turns them in. This means more to them than the money. Probably if it was $20, it would mean more. At some point, they'll take the money. But the point of the matter is that when you use something like this, it's symbolic. And it has a multiplier effect. It reminds them of something, a good behavior that they did that's important to the organization. And when they show it to their kids or another coworker sees it, say, oh, what did you do? Oh, yeah, well, I had an idea for how we might save some money. Really? I've got an idea. I'm going to turn it in. And you get a multiplier effect from that person repeating the behavior or from others who are influenced by it as well. Lots and lots of ways that you can do this along that line. So in general, you can apply these principles to any type of performance. And we actually have a video clip of one company I work with, Boardroom Inc., that, for example, they found that they wanted to get more initiative from their employees, and they asked every employee to turn in 2 ideas every week. Now, a lot of times when we want ideas from employees, companies will put up a suggestion box, and and the first people that turn in suggestions, if they get any reply at all, it's often telling them why it's a silly idea, and the whole thing grinds to a halt. Not at Boardroom Inc. Every employee is expected to turn in 2 ideas every week. Now, the first time you do that, the first ideas you might get are maybe knee-jerk reactions. Why don't we fix something that's broken and whatnot? But next week, you have employees think about it a little bit further, and they know they got to come up with 2 ideas, so they start thinking about it as they're doing the job. They start thinking about it as they're coming to work. Maybe they start thinking about it in the shower in the morning, what their ideas are going to be this week. They've taken this simple idea, and to this day, some 10 or 12 years later, they still get people turning in 2 ideas a week every single week. It's had they feel that doing this one thing systematically and sticking with it has led to a 5-fold increase in their revenues in a 4-year period. And it's just in all shapes and sizes, big and small. They had one employee that was who worked in their shipping area, who sent out, as they published books and newsletters, would send out this book. Their idea one week is that when they said when they ordered the book from the printer, if they would get the size of the book shaved a little bit, less than a 1/16 of an inch on the paper size, they thought that this book would fall under the next postal rate and they'd save some money. Well, they did that, and the first year alone they saved almost $500,000. And the chairman of the company, Marty Edelston, told me, he said, Bob, I worked in mail order for 23 years. I didn't even know there was a 4th-class postal rate. But the person doing the job every day knows very clearly. And if you tap into having them look for ways we can be better, you'll be surprised at what you can come up with. So they don't force that on people. They encourage them to give ideas. And then instead of having a committee to shoot them down, They have a volunteer review most of the ideas. And what they do with them is they go, well, that's a great idea. You really should do it. And they give them permission to run with their idea. In general, all this boils down to really what I call two secrets of managing performance. The first is all performance starts with clear goals. Clear goals. You can't focus on everything, so you've got to constantly be prioritizing what's most important. The specific things that are going to make the biggest difference in our success in our area. We know the best goals are stretch goals. They're not too easy, they're not too hard, they're somewhere in between. The best goals today involve people. As you involve employees in the goals you're setting for them, they can't help but gain some ownership. In working with Sears Roebuck, for example, a large retailer here in the States, they found that as they went to get more initiative from their employees, they pushed decision-making to each store and each department within the store. And they involved employees in setting up goals, including the financial goals for the operation. And so instead of getting strategic goals and they come to an area and the manager looks at them and sticks them in a file cabinet, they would take them and say, okay, what do you think we can do? Do you think we can do better than this? Everyone think about this. Let's get together again in a week and tell me your ideas. And 9 times out of 10, they would set harder goals for themselves than corporate would set for them. Into that first year when they did that on a voluntary basis, across the nation, they found the highest profit Sears stores, the ones with the greatest revenue increase, were all the ones that had gone to this joint decision-making process where people truly felt a part of their job and environment. And they owned the goals as their own, and with it had a higher energy to make them happen. So all performance starts with clear goals. When you get serious about performance of any type, you have to get serious about recognition, noticing the goals. To any type of, often called the greatest management principle in the world, is a simple notion that you get what you reward. All behavior is controlled by its consequences. This is a fundamental of positive reinforcement. In my studies at Claremont Graduate University, the professor I had said, this is overwhelming proof that we know this works, that you get what you reward, yet there's been very little application of it in the business world. And I remember thinking to myself, I want to try to change that. I want to show people that the power of this principle really does work. And it can work for you if you harness it. And so systematically, to any type of behavior, you got 3 possible consequences. A positive consequence, someone noticed, someone thanked you, someone encouraged you. A negative consequence, someone said, why did you do that? Or we're not going to, or that was the wrong thing to do, or that was a mistake, or maybe said so in front of a peer or a customer and embarrassed you, or don't ever do that again, or no consequence. You do something and you don't get any feedback either way. Of those 3 possibilities, as I've asked employees around the world, let alone around the U.S., I find most employees say that where they work, they don't get much of any consequence. They come to work, they try and do their best. They don't feel a lot of support, a lot of direction. But heaven help you if you make a mistake because your boss is all over you right away. We call that style of management leave alone zap, that we leave people alone and then we zap them when they make a mistake. And if you're not careful, as you're more pressed for time, you end up spending more and more time on the errors, the mistakes, the fires to put out, the complaints from customers, and the things that are going right, the encouragement of employees, we squeeze out and have no time for. In fact, some of you might have, at some point in your career, have had a manager we call, if you perfect this style, we call it Seagull Management. This is someone that's not around very often. They're on the phone or they're traveling. One day they fly in, they make a lot of noise, they dump on everybody, and they swoop out. The new employee goes, who was that? That was the big guy, number 1. Oh, what a jerk. And the point is that if you use a negative consequence in a relationship with an employee or a colleague or your boss, people don't take from that, wow, how can I do a better job? They take from that, I'll never make that mistake again. And are reluctant to take a risk the next time because they see what happens if you suggest an idea, or you do something without authorization, or you go to help a customer and it turns out to be against a policy. And so they become more and more protective and draw back from the opportunities. In fact, on this other video clip I have, I've got several examples of companies that they have grappled with this and zeroed in on the importance of how you handle mistakes in making a positive work environment. William McKnight, former CEO of 3M, for example, says the mistakes people make are much less important than the mistakes management makes if it tells them exactly what to do. Or one of my favorite quotes from Bill Gates, chairman of Microsoft, he said, you could tell a lot about the long-term viability of any organization by looking at how they handle mistakes. Because if they criticize, if they embarrass someone, if they shoot the idea down, yeah, the person will never make that mistake again. But what you lose from that instance is their willingness to take initiative, to take a risk, to use their best judgment, and you might lose that forever in their employment with you. It's important how you handle that and you turn a mistake into a positive opportunity for learning and growth. And then, of course, the positive consequences. You know, this is not my subjective opinion. In research done at Ohio State University, for example, they tried to quantify the relative weight of different consequences on driving desired performance and behavior. They found the positive consequences had 4 times the power of a negative or no consequence. 4 times the power at driving that performance, at getting the desired behavior repeated. Flip side of that is that for every time you criticize someone, every time you are in a bad mood and you yell at someone or you reprimand them unjustifiably, you have to do at least 4 things that are positive to keep that relationship at an even par. So that's the essence of what I wanted to get across with you here today. And I find that that's a lot of times when it comes to how you reinforce the desired behavior, whether it's initiative or cost-saving ideas, customer service, the ways you notice and acknowledge that can be amazingly simple, often require little or no money. Roy Moody, president of Roy Moody Associates, says the greatest motivational act one person can do for another is to listen. And just taking the time with an employee to hear them out often shows that you trust and respect them and builds trust in the relationship. And many times our relationships can be a measure of all the interactions we've had with each person. You add up out of the last 50 interactions with someone you work with, how many of those have been positive versus negative? And you have a sense of a measure for your relationship right there. Mary Kay Ash, founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics, once said there's 2 things that people want more than sex and money: recognition and praise. Now that's not a researched data point there, but it's an interesting perspective that she found that helped to make her company successful. So what I find today that employees want more than ever are often things that don't cost any money at all. And I want to share with you just the top 10 things I found in my ongoing research. And you might want to take that framework and ask your own people what's important to them. A lot of times we think it's just money. And money is important. We need money to pay our bills. But often, once people are able to pay their bills, they look for other things to be as important, maybe more important. How they're involved in things, the responsibility they're given, the chance to pursue an idea. And out of the top 10 that I found in my study, employees reported a learning activity was critical to them, to be able to gain new skills that would increase their marketability in the long term. A choice of assignment relates to that. Flexible working hours is increasingly important to employees, how the flexibility of their time so they can best manage their time to fit their overall life and circumstances is more and more important. Time off from work, whether it's an afternoon or an extended lunch or a flexibility in the hours that they're there, are the types of things that increasingly with highly trained workforce is more and more important to them. Personal praise is incredibly important to today's employees. Being thanked for doing a good job, whether that's verbally, in public, in a written note, or electronically on an email or in voicemail, that more and more in changing dynamic times, people want and need to be reassured that they're doing the right thing and they did a good job at it. It also serves a practical feedback on knowing exactly what to have them do again, and sets up a model for other people to see as someone is acknowledged for doing a good job. what good work looks like around here, so they become a role model for other employees as well. Praise is affirmation that we're on the right track. Knowing how I'm doing, knowing what's going on with the organization, where we're headed, can give me a sense of security that I'm in a good place, even in drastically changing times and drastically, increasingly stressful times, where all employees are asked to do more with less. Increased autonomy and authority in one's job, the employees report as being very important. Again, that's the ability to pursue an idea when someone has it, that the trust that they can handle the job is very important. And finally, rounding out this top 10 is time with their manager, having access to a manager. Now, I'm convinced that that work is increasingly becoming a state of mind rather than a place to be. A state of mind, and it doesn't matter how much physical time you have. What matters is having